Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel. My name is Benji Stern, and I'm a junior at Bloomfield Hills High School. I'm currently a member of Hank Greenberg AZA and BBYO, the Youth Federation of Temple Israel, and the Jewish Fund Teen Board. I'm an active member of my school's Political Awareness Club and the Junior State of America. I have a passion for social action work and volunteering in the community. I enjoy playing soccer, acting in my school plays, creative writing, and keeping up with the news in our community and around the world.
Hi, everyone. My name is Haley Lipman. I'm a current junior at Walled Lake Northern High School. I'm a member of Temple Shir Shalom and the youth group there. Along with this, I'm the co-founder of a new Jewish feminist youth group and the president of a club called Students Leading Students. Along with this, I am very focused on nonprofit work and giving back to my community. I'm really interested to learn even more on how to become involved with the election, and I really hope you are all ready to learn how we can use a Jewish lens on teen involvement in this upcoming election.
And we are your panelists. So why are we doing this? Why does this election matter? As teens, we will all be eligible to vote within the next few years. Although we can't vote now, there are so many ways that we can be active participants in our country's democracy. This includes starting important conversations with the people in our lives and educating ourselves so that when it does come time for us to vote, we can make well-informed decisions.
As we unite on this call, it is warming to know that we are all part of a welcoming Jewish community. As Jews, it is imperative that we are all involved with the election. This panel discussion is just one of the ways where we, as Jewish teens, can represent and benefit from being both activists and Jewish figures. Tonight's panel is composed of influential Jewish leaders from around the country. Our first panelist is Sam Englender. Sam Englender is a community outreach manager for the Jewish Community Relations Council, AJC. He spends most of his time building coalitions with the Black and Muslim communities in Detroit and advocating for shared concerns. Sam has rabbinical ordination from YCT, an Orthodox rabbinical school in New York City. Rabbi Jeff Stamba is the executive director of The Well, an organization that empowers young adults to bring Judaism to life through intentional, inclusive, and innovative programming. He is new to Detroit and is excited to help young adults find their community to do Jewish in life and discover their authentic brand of Judaism. Before this, he worked in Chicago at a very Jewishy, justicey, lovey, spiritually oriented, down-to-earth community. He was ordained out of the Reformed Seminary, Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles.
And lastly, we have Alicia Chandler. Alicia Chandler is a graduate at Wayne State University in the sociology department. She's studying interfaith marriage in the Jewish community. She's an alum of Ahava, BBG, and she has a bunch of awards and degrees and serves on a bunch of boards, but none of you care about that. She first volunteered for a political campaign when she was 12 and went door to door all by herself. And now we will turn our attention over to Jeff and Sam as they lay out the framework and basis for tonight's Zoom meeting.
Thank you guys so much. First off, I'm going to give a little spiel of my thoughts before we get into, and so will Rabbi Jeff before we get into the Q&A. But I just kind of wanted to introduce myself and get a sense of who you guys are. Who am I and who am you? Who are you? So I grew up around here. I grew up originally in Southfield and then 13 in between Telegraph and Lazar, and then came back recently about 3 years ago. Just using today as a capsule of what is it that I actually do and why I'm here. So today, the first thing I did was run a advocacy webinar for the Uyghurs. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Uyghur crisis, but it's probably the largest human rights crisis in the world right now. It's a Muslim minority group in Northwest China that there's 1 million plus folks who are in concentration camps. So the beginning of my day was organizing 6-7 organizations and running this webinar, seeking to educate folks The second part of my day was working with a coalition for Black and Jewish Unity, which is a local coalition that works trying to really bring together our two communities. So my day is really focused in a lot of the nitty gritty of how to make an impact. But you know, my opening thoughts are really not about that. I wanted to just zoom back and think a little bit about, for me, what Judaism has to say about our current climate. I'm someone who, you know, I spent 4 or 5 years in rabbinical school. I spent a lot of time with Jewish texts and Jewish tradition. I also spent a lot of time, I'm kind of immersed in the political reality of our world. And I'm curious. So are folks able to put their video on right now? Is that possible, or are you, no? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a few faces.
A few faces. Okay. Anyone who's able to put the video on, because I want people to raise their hands. So who here has gotten a fight with someone recently about politics? Raise your hand. Yeah. Okay. I got some. Who here only has friends that you'd say like basically the same political persuasion, right? Like Democrats, Republicans, right? Okay. So we've some. Who here has often felt scared or angry about the state of the country recently? I see a lot of hands. Okay. Me too, 100%. And the thing that's like scared me the most more about any specific policy, and I don't think that Judaism actually has much to say about the specifics of, you know, this healthcare plan versus this healthcare plan, but it's really been about partisanship. And, you know, I think all of us can agree that things are drifting further and further and apart. And so the framing that I just want to put forth at the beginning is, you know, I think of as Judaism as an extended family, and we're told that, you know, all of us have a common ancestor, and that if we look even further, it's as though there's these concentric circles of family. Our closest family are people who, right, our parents, our siblings. Then we have an extended family, the Jewish family. Then we have an even more extended family, you know, as United States citizens. And then we have the most extended family as everyone on this globe. And so for me, that's been really powerful and is exemplified in the teaching, which you guys have probably heard of Hillel, right? Don't do to others as you would like to do to yourself, right? That's like considered, that's his answer to the question, what's the most important part of Judaism? But there's another point which Ben Azai, who was another rabbi at the same time, when asked that same question, and he said, Sefer Toldot Adam, this is the book of generations, basically that Adam is all, we are all descended from Adam. And so I think for me, framing it in terms of that sense of being able to see each and every one of us as related, even if we strongly disagree, is something that is very refreshing to me. So I'll leave it there and hand it over to Rabbi Jeff, and I'm happy to answer any questions either on the Jewish side or on the political side moving forward.
Thank you, Sam. I'm glad we get to be in this family room together, really, truly. That's a beautiful framework for this. So who am I, just a little bit, and sort of why I'm here. I work with, not usually with teenagers, I work with young adults and families with young kids. And I'm very passionate about translating this tradition in a relevant way to people who are young adults and really to teenagers. I'm really grateful to be in this room with all of you, and more grateful that you're in this room and are choosing to take this time in your day to have this conversation. To me, my framework for this, for Judaism in general, and then I'll talk a little bit about the politics in this election, are two real frameworks. One, I like to think of Judaism as a set of tools for us to be able to use in order to bring more connectivity and meaning to our life. And when I say that, I mean all of the Jewish tradition, Jewish ritual, Jewish stories, Jewish history, the history that exists in lore, the history that exists in artifacts in different places around the world. all of it is at our fingertips to be able to use to better understand our lives, because this is a living tradition. One of my favorite frameworks for Torah, which I really extend beyond just the Sefer Torah, is what Rabbi Jonathan Sachs teaches as the Torah as an intersection between history and memory. History being his story or her story or their story, and memory being my story. And I'm in this constant relationship with trying to read history, which I think is, for me anyway, personally, a very useful tool in understanding where I am in the context of living ever. And also memory, my story, like thinking about who I am. And Judaism really is this, and all Jewish tradition and Talmud and questioning and all the principles that guide this beautiful, beautiful mosaic of a tradition is it's something we can bring our whole selves and all of our hard questions to. And we can trust that when we give this tradition these questions, we will be able to somehow filter it through an algorithm and a conversation that includes disagreement and tension and also love and warmth, to be able to come out the other end with more clarity for how we can walk in the world and live with this tradition. And politics and civil, our world today is really the world we're living in. So the question is like, how do we walk and where do we go? And so the two questions of what does being Jewish have to do with elections? And I think, to me, that is a sense of collective responsibility. I mean, most immediately, this primary idea that we have a responsibility to sort of be in the world actively. This is why you're here. This is not like new or novel. And one of the values, I think, that is wrapped up, to me anyway, in our story of liberation from Egypt, is that our liberation and walking out of Egypt is also wrapped up in the mixed multitude of everybody who came with us. Like, there's a real sense of being in communal responsibility. And then this election, to say, why this, the question was, why is this election important for the Jewish people, which is sort of like, what makes this election different from all other elections is an interesting question, and a real one, and a hard one, and hard in form and in character and feeling, because of what Sam was also talking about in regards to like this being a very partisan world that we're living in. And there, as a consequence of that, there's some real feeling of like high stakes and anxieties that feel like put on this election. And when I get to that point of, I think, frozen anxiety, when I think about that, when I have those moments of fear and frustration, I'm, as a rabbi, and I think something that I would love to impart on everybody here is to trust that, okay, when I have those hard feelings, I can put those into the Jewish tradition that's really, really old and ancient and beautiful, to be able to figure out a way to figure out my path forward, because there's a lot here for us to chew on and think about. So I'm grateful to be in this conversation with you and to try anyway and sort some of it out.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for laying down the framework for tonight's call. Now we are going to open the floor up for Q&A with the panelists. We ask you to type your questions in the chat, and we will read them out loud so that the panelists can answer them. And then if there was a particular panelist that you would like to answer a specific question, just go ahead and specify that as well.
So as we wait for you guys to put your questions in the chat, we're going to start with some questions of our own. So for any of you to answer, why do we as Jews have an obligation to vote at all, to voice our opinion and vote?
As a token non-rabbi in the panel, I'm not going to speak of mitzvah, but I will speak of one Jewish value that I have that I really bring to bear when I come to vote. And that's this concept of gemilut hatzadim, acts of loving kindness. So for me, and I hate to use the word evangelical on a Jewish call, but I am evangelical about voting. I try to get everyone to vote. If you're voting like I do, if you're voting not like I do, I love the act of voting. And for me, voting is an act of love for my country. Now, let me specify, it's not love for everything about my country. It's love for what my country could possibly be if it lived up to its best self and its best values. And that's what I bring with me when I go to vote. And to me, what makes voting a Jewish value for me is because I believe that, for me, God calls me to help in creation of the world. And one way we get to help create and recreate our country is the act of voting. It's a right that people suffered for, people died for. As a woman, it's a right that's only been bestowed to me for 100 years, and I am going to do it. I don't care if it's a presidential election or a municipal bond. I do not miss a single opportunity to vote, and I go with relish. I love doing it.
I love that. And just to piggyback on that, about 60 years ago, someone asked Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was the leading ultra-Orthodox rabbi in the United States. He was considered the royalty, so to speak. They asked him, why should we as Jews vote? And you also have to think of it in the context is at that time, there were a lot of people who, if not themselves, but their parents or their grandparents came from Europe and grew up under a context where there was not the type of democracy we think of as democracy, or there was such incredible lack of equity and persecution of the Jewish populace. So they're asking, now we're in America, why should we vote, or should we vote? And what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein responded is similar to what Alicia said, but maybe framed a little differently, is that it's about gratitude. 2,000 years ago in the Torah, there was not such a thing as democracy, at least in the land of Israel. But now we live in a country where, thank God, it is imperfect and it is not, the ideal of what it could be, but there is so much to be grateful for, especially when you, start thinking about other contexts that Jews have been in for thousands and thousands of years. So, that's something that really speaks to me, is that it's our responsibility, like Alicia said, and I think it's also a way to express our gratitude to this country, which has given us so much.
I want to piggyback off of that, and just to highlight that relationship between Jews and the country that they're in. And here we're American Jews, and I love looking back. Like the very first thing I thought of is like different periods of history, like the proto-Zionism, before Zionism, and this conversation that exists around the world since then, and even before then, actually, in different places in Poland and Germany, where the identity of Jewish people were always, and it rightfully like mixed up with the people that they're in, just being in diaspora. And so that was community responsibility. And as American Jews, for me, I think that there's a sense of an obligation to vote and being a participant, an active participant in civil society. I also just wanted to hinge on this question about what voting is to me as really an opportunity to make things better, like, and however that means and whatever that means to you, and to vote to create change and on a degree at a time or 2 degrees at a time, whatever that is, which is also such the project of, I think, the Jewish project is to make the world a better place, and it creates a relationship of obligation to show up and to vote.
Thank you guys so much. Our next question comes from Lindsay Randall. What can we do as teens under 18 to get involved?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. So I'll try to give you some more takeaways at the end, but let me start with a few big takeaways, because I'm sure what's really frustrating for a lot of you right now is you keep hearing that there's 2 ways to help. You can vote or you can give money. Now, a lot of you can't legally vote, you're under 18, and I'm sure you're not sitting on a bunch of expendable cash that you can just start handing out to candidates. So the frustrating ask is, what do you do? And the answer is a lot. There is so much you can do as a teenager, as a young person, to help in this election and help politically. So let me give you a few just concrete pieces. One is you can volunteer for campaigns. Now that might sound totally daunting for you, but and I think it was said in my intro, literally the first time I volunteered on a campaign, I was 12 years old. I went door to door stuffing, like the annoying stuff you get on your door about the candidate. And then on election day, the party actually sent me door to door to knock on certain doors and say, "Hi, have you voted today?" Which was great because I was 12. So I'd be like, "Please go vote. I can't vote. You go vote." But it was great. And I was actually a pretty shy kid, so it wasn't necessarily easy for me, but it was a really great informative experience. So volunteering is one thing you can do. But when I say volunteer, I don't want you to hear, I can volunteer for the presidential campaign. I mean, you can, absolutely. There are so many interesting races. It could be from someone to sit on your city council or village council, depending where you live. It can be, for those of you who live in Oakland County, we have a Parks and Rec bond that's going, and I'm sure you guys all want really nice parks here in Oakland County. The issues that impact us, they're the big ones. You always hear about the big ones, but a lot of times it's actually the local ones. And from the perspective of sort of someone who's volunteering at a young age, sometimes those where you actually might get to sit and talk to the candidate or Zoom with the candidate might be more meaningful to you. Or maybe it's an issue. Maybe there's an issue that you really care about personally, and there's a way to get involved with a group that's working on that issue. So you can do a lot of things like that. The other thing I want to just pitch is for those of you who are 16 and 17 and older, obviously, but 16 and 17, you can also work as a poll worker on election day. If you have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer that. I have worked both as a worker for a political party or a volunteer for a political party, but also now as a poll worker in my city. I run a precinct. It's not a volunteer position. They pay you $11 an hour in most places. And you actually get to go and help and process voters. And a lot of the people who do this, the average age for prior elections probably hovered around 80. I wish I was kidding, I'm not. So they can really use young people who know how to use computers and who are less susceptible to COVID than our friends who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s. So that's another great opportunity. And I know the election's only 2 weeks away. It's actually not too late. A lot of cities in the area are still looking for people to volunteer to be poll workers.
I want to add an idea that just popped into my head, and I know you're going to be talking more at the end, but which is to say, I hope that you can build on this if it's something you were going to talk on. But there's a beautiful piece. As a new person in Detroit, I hear this story a lot about how people grew up here. They might go away for college and come back, and there's a lot of people who were born here and raised here who live here as adults, and which creates in my head an opportunity for you as teenagers in high school, because the questions like where do you go to high school always, of building relationships with people who might naturally be or just have grown up in, like, who might be ideologically in a different place than you might be, wherever that is. Like if you are active in politics, maybe see if you can find, like, using the resources, your youth group advisors and rabbis and other, like, there's a plenty of people who I think would really relish in the opportunity to help facilitate you building a relationship with somebody who might be who might be in like ideological natural tension with as it exists, because building and forming that relationship now will be something for you to build on and be in practice about. And if you're comfortable with that kind of a relationship, or seeking that relationship, to have like a diverse group of friends, a diverse group of people that you're comfortable talking with and bringing conversation in about, because those that's ultimately actively helping, for the sake of future generations, your generation, of bridging that gap of any kind of a divide and partisanship or ideology that we're literally seeing now play out in different ways. So make friends.
Yeah, I would just say, all of the things that I was advocating for this Uyghur program, for example, have nothing to do with age. No citizens are voting on it. There's so many issues out there that are about, writing to your senator, calling your senator, getting organizations that you're a part of signed on to drives and things like that. I think there's a lot of ways that people can affect specific issues that they're passionate about that, have nothing to do with voting.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Does anyone else want to jump in before we move on to the next question? All right. So the next question for any of the panelists to answer is, what are the Jewish values around things like protest, and what is the Jewish stance on rebellious politics?
I'm letting a rabbi start that one.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a, sorry, you want to take it? I'm happy to.
I think we should both. I mean, I'm happy. I think we should both take it. I'm happy to go if you want something.
Yeah, you know, it just, I don't know if any of you have done a lot of reading of the prophets. There's a big chunk of the Bible, which are prophets who are people living in a very specific time and a very specific place. And I know I said before that I don't think that Judaism has, you know, a specific thing to say about, you know, healthcare, but if there were a prophet nowadays, they would disagree with me, because they were really the ones who, they were the protesters of their day. And if you read that part of the Bible, you know, it's about specific things. There are these rich people, for example, you know, that aren't, you know, contributing to society and taking care of the vulnerable. There are, you know, if you read, it's incredible. Anyone who's been to synagogue on Yom Kippur knows that the Haftorah, the prophetic reading on Yom Kippur, is, yeah, that's great, you're fasting. You can't just fast. You have to actually take care of the vulnerable. So, you know, I think there's this tension in Judaism between this strong prophetic voice, which is incredibly powerful and is about kind of raising consciousness, and, you know, the kind of rabbinic voice, which is more about structure and more about like, oh, how do we enact change that is sustainable and not tearing down the structure. So I think both of those are definitely in our tradition, and it's just, yeah, it's just different people fall in different places.
I love that answer. I think my take is a little different. I love the prophetic voice and the rabbinic voice, but I think at least I know that in my schools, there was always a natural tension in those, and depending on who you were and what the context was, those would be more or less overlapping. Like the rabbis would take on prophetic voice and sometimes the rabbis would take on like more of that organizational structure voice. I know personally for me, I've always been more of the organizational structure, like personally, like really just speaking for me, I've never been the one to like eagerly seek out a protest, knowing full well that protest is a very Jewish thing. It is like, it's embedded in Jewish culture from the prophets to even as I think about like the story of Hanukkah, like playing dreidel was an act of protest to not being able to like study Torah. And it was a private act of protest, but it was an act of protest nonetheless. And I think that, and which also makes me think about, you know, sometimes like Jewish acts, depending on the context and history, are also particularly, you know, I would say act of protest, like even putting that, like publicly putting the Hanukkah in the window can be just an act of voicing, this is the opinion in the context of whatever, I know the situation might be in the context of history. I also was in thinking about protests too, because it's something that I struggle with, knowing that there's like a real value at the same time of Judaism of let's hear both sides, let's question and hear both sides, and also let's find ourselves, somebody's going to be inside the building having a conversation, somebody might be outside the building protesting what's happening inside the building, knowing that both there's different like valid Jewish places to be on both sides. It's a struggle. And I also think that this really goes back into our there's two things I would like to say. I think to say one, I was thinking about again that story out of Egypt, and I was thinking like, was putting blood on the doorposts of the house an act of protest in the context of like the Egyptian powers that be, and even in that climactic high stakes moment at the end of the 10 plagues. And I wonder, like, is that like kind of like putting a sign out saying like, look, I'm just going to voice this out as an act of sort of voicing this, and on the other, and then the other being the thinking about like a more modern history, like the prophet and rabbi really, like, but having that stance of Abraham Joshua Heschel, praying with your feet, all sorts of different, like I think he as a model of how I'm hope that you are not hearing about this person for the first time. If so, please look him up. But he was really truly crucial to a number of different monumental pieces of the I'm forgetting the name, but he had of the act, but he had relationships with the Pope, he had relationship with Dr. King, and like some in behind the scenes in relationship, and also on the street, able to sort of voice you know, the Jewish perspective of the Jewish value of protest.
So Jeff, real quick, I want to pick up on that love point because you brought up like one of my favorite quotes, Abraham Joshua Heschel, the concept of praying with your feet. And for any of you who haven't heard that particular quote, he actually said it in reference to marching with Dr. King in Selma. So like, picture this, you have this rabbi, and if you can see the pictures, and he looks very much like a rabbi, came out of, you know, the European schools, and he referred to marching in Selma with Dr. King as an act of praying with his feet. So I'll just give you sort of my quick take on protest. And I'm going to admit it's not something I do a lot of anymore, because, you know, because of some of the work I've done, I tend to be the one in the building, in the room, having the conversation. But let me encourage the act of protest, because I think protesting about things I cared about when I was younger really informed the activist I became. And I had the experience of marching with my mom on the mall in Washington for a cause we both cared about. And that like is something that literally for the rest of my years, I will remember as this meaningful act of walking together for something that was meaningful to us. And it really brought out that idea of praying with your feet. Sometimes you can't do anything else. You don't have other power, or maybe you do, but this act of coming together in solidarity with other people and just saying, I care about whatever this is. Whether it is the protests for racial justice that have swept our country this summer, whether it is marches for reproductive rights, for gay rights, for whatever you care about, there are moments. And I remember a specific moment just that I could speak to was right after the Muslim ban was enacted. A lot of the work I've done in my career as an activist has been in the Muslim-Jewish relationship. And all of a sudden I got a call, because we were like, what do we do? And I got a call from one of my friends that were protesting at the airport. And there I was, jumped in a car with a bunch of other people. We were literally borrowing someone's kids' markers to make signs before we like flew out the door to get to the airport, like parked in the middle of nowhere and walked to get there. And all we could do at that moment was just hold a sign. We had no other power, but I have to tell you, being with all those people, it gave you your power back. So that's just like a plea. I'm not saying, you know, you have to care about this thing or this thing, but if there's a moment in your life that you really find yourself caring, the act of protest is more powerful than sometimes you would imagine it would be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So the next question comes from Kira Sorokin. At what point did you realize that there are more than 2 political parties running for president?
For me, I'll say the first time I showed up to vote in a presidential election and you saw that there were, no, that was not something I had any consciousness about. And I think, yeah, it was not, and we can, there's a whole different conversation to be had on, you know, options, you know. One thing, if you're looking for something to advocate for, look into ranked choice voting is an interesting one out there for political nerds out there. But yeah, no, we live in a system that's dominated by 2 parties. So it's really shocking when you see your ballot and you see how long it is and how many different people are running for how many different things.
Yeah, samesies for me on that. First time I showed up, I was like, who are these people? It's like I had that, yeah, same.
Yeah, 100%. And that gets into like, you know, the partisanship thing that I just, it's crazy to me that like any issue nowadays in our society, there are only two answers to it, and there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and that answer depends on which side you are. It's crazy. Like that clearly is not the case. And yeah, so I am frustrated by the fact that there are only two parties, although I am also an Israeli citizen and I lived there for many years, and the political process there isn't so incredible either. So everywhere has its challenges.
And by the way, just lest you think this is a problem that only the young had, there was someone who's working at my precinct from the US Taxpayer Party 2 years ago, and I had no idea that existed until I met her. So as politically involved as I am, no, I had no idea.
I also want to, I hope I don't irritate as a panelist, but I want to, what you said actually reminded me of one other thing I wanted to say about protest in an interesting kind of a way, validating both the value of being outside the building and also in the building. Like I know Alicia was talking about being regularly inside and also outside, is that in my experience, this is personal, in my personal experience, and I guess my perspective, rabbinically, Jewishly, as Rabbi Jeff, I find that there's an important role for protest. And also when you're outside with a lot of signs, it's hard to have a nuanced conversation. And that happens inside the room. And one also like affects the other. And I think there's a lot of value to be said for being inside the room and having a nuanced conversation that really can't be afforded in the same sort of a manner when you're outside of the room, at least with the people that are inside the building. There is a lot of nuanced conversation. I know that happens in the streets in a lot of really exciting ways that are very, I don't want to take away from that because that's like very real and empowering and special and important. But in the context of like, if you're trying to solve the big problems and like, how can I, where is my voice going to be most well heard? There is absolutely, I think, equal opportunity for both places to be totally valid and important. And I just wanted to recognize some of that. And so thank you for indulging.
Awesome. So we're running a little bit low on time. So if anyone has one more question, we can answer it. So you can unmute, or we have some prompted questions that we can ask as well if no one has any for the final question. All right. So one question that we thought of was, the conversations have been so hostile around this election and nobody can have a civil discussion. How does the Torah or Judaism guide us to have more productive conversations? How do we have these conversations when there is so much disagreement? And we're just going to ask like one or two panelists just to answer this one, just because we want to respect everyone's time.
Yeah, I'm happy to, I was really struck by when so many people raise their hands when they've been, I asked the question, how many of you feel scared or anxious lately about the election? And like that fear and anxiety is something that I've definitely been feeling too. And I think it's really, I think getting to the root of that for me is the answer to that question. Like, I think for me, at least, that fear and anxiety comes from a lack of trust and a lack of faith in the larger political processes and the larger, not like voting doesn't work. I believe voting works, but like a lack of faith in the direction that this country is going and a lot of the surrounding structures. And so I think what Judaism does say about that is that two things, in that we can't demonize other people. We can't assume the worst, right? I think so often nowadays we assume the worst of someone who's different. I mean, it doesn't mean that, right? We can strongly disagree with their opinions, but you've probably heard of Hillel, right? Hillel and Shammai, they had a battle. They did not like each other. They were not friends. And they had schools of thought. Like nowadays, they had whole groups of people around them that could not stand each other. It's even said that, not themselves, but their schools fought each other and even killed each other, right? This was like a civil war, basically. And we're told, we follow Hillel. Hillel's the good guy in the story, right? Hillel won out. So we're told that what was Hillel's, why did Hillel win? because he was humble, and before he put his own view first, he mentioned the view of Shammai. And so I think when you have faith in both your opponent, so to speak, and stop seeing them as an opponent, but rather as a fellow human, then it starts lessening that fear, at least does for me. So, that to me is like the biggest thing that has helped, and I think can be really powerful.
Thank you so much. And I believe Alicia has some ways that we can become involved as teens, even though we can't vote yet.
Thank you so much. So I already mentioned a few of them earlier. Volunteer for a political cause, volunteer for a candidate, be a poll worker if you're 16. But some of you might hear that and I think say, that sounds super scary. Did you know there's a pandemic? You want me to talk to people? What if these are people that don't agree with me? So like, I can say it like a super easy thing, and I might have just caused you an anxiety attack, so I'm sorry about that. Here's what I would say about that. One, you have more power than you think you do. And you're better at this than you think you are. And I say that as, so again, in my position and like how I've sort of fought my way into the room, as you know, Rabbi Jeff and I have talked about, I guarantee you, we have 6 congressional representatives here in Detroit. If one of you came with me to meet with one of them, they would 10 times rather talk to you than they would talk to me. You are way more interesting. In the world we are creating and fighting for, you guys, God willing, will be in it for much, much longer than we will. So your voices are important. So when you're talking, whether it's talking to your peers, to other voters, to congressional aides, to members of Congress, your voices are important. And one of the things that you get to do right now through your temple youth groups, through BBYO, through all these other amazing organizations I know you have at your schools, is you are practicing finding your voice, using your voice. And if I could give one piece of advice, don't wait till you think you're perfect at it to do it. Because you might find that you're much better at it than you think you would be, and that people care about what you have to say a lot more than you think they would. So that's just like one piece of takeaway is don't be scared of the process. The only way anyone gets involved is to just one day show up and say, I care about this thing, whatever that is for you, whatever that means for you. And by the way, just so everyone knows, I was a 12 and 13-year-old who was scared to talk to anyone and ended up for a period of my career as a trial lawyer, thanks to BBYO. So shout out to the organization that helped me find my voice. The other thing I'll say, and this really goes back a little to the last question, is one piece of this that I'm sure scares you in getting involved, even making telephone calls, texting, going door to door, is what if I talk to someone that disagrees with me? So let me give you a contrary opinion on that. Now, I'll preface by saying you should never have to talk to anyone who threatens your mental or physical well-being. And that's really, really important. And for many of us, someone who would deny our rights to exist, our right to live as a Jew with our sexual orientation, with the color of our skin, that's a non-starter, and that's okay. That's not what I'm talking about here. You have a chance in life to meet a great variety of people that come from different backgrounds at you, that have had different lived experiences from you. And a lot of times the best thing you can do is listen, is say, what does that mean to you? What is your story? And what you can do at this age, and when you get into these opportunities, is sometimes just ask the question and listen to the answer. And those lessons that you learn, hopefully you will continue to be that inquisitive and that curious, and that will help you be a better advocate for the things you care about for the rest of your life. So I just wish you good luck. hopefully, Godspeed in the election, and may we all have a peaceful few weeks and a wonderful COVID-free year to come in the future at some point. Thank you so much.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Before we conclude tonight's call, we would just like to thank all of our wonderful panelists and teen community engagement coordinators for putting this together. It's truly been amazing.
Yeah, so one of the most powerful aspects of the group that we have here today is the fact that we are all Jewish, right? And when we allow ourselves to see the world through a Jewish lens, there's this sense of unity and comfort.
With all the chaos going on with the election, it's important to remind ourselves that we are all supported and connected through Judaism. It is imperative now more than ever that we become involved in the election. Although we may not be able to vote, our voices are still being heard.
For every person that we talk to about voting, and for every individual that we can educate, we're shaping the future. Although we may not be able to physically place our ballot in the box, our panelists have given us the means by which we can become involved in the election.
From having deliberate and meaningful conversations with the adults around us to becoming educated about the role government plays in our lives, we have the ability to design the future we wish to see. We are our future.
Thank you all so much for joining the call tonight. We acknowledge and appreciate your efforts to become influential teens. We encourage you all to check out the link that we've added to the chat. And there you'll be able to learn even more ways in which you can become involved in the upcoming election. If you wish to be connected to any of the panelists or other community members on the call, we'll leave Katie Veter's email in the chat. But thank you and have a meaningful rest of your week. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend.